Hey there, welcome to ECAPs Watch. I'm Kevin Houlihan, the CEO at Workflow Services, and today I'm joined by Zach Rosko. Zach has pharmacy practice experience in community pharmacy, and he's got a focus on pharmacy policy. Thanks for joining me, Zach. Zach's got a passion around helping pharmacies transform. And Zach, speaking of transformation, I can't think of much that could drive transformation faster than the ECAPs legislation that's at the federal level right now. Can you?
Kevin, thanks for having me. Thinking of what actually could push the profession forward faster, there's only a few things that come to mind, and they're, to be honest, pretty far out of reach. I'm thinking of things like a single payer. So a single payer system where you're guaranteed any patient walks in the door, you're getting payment. Massive national PBM reform that drastically changes how pharmacies get paid and makes dispensing a sustainable practice again, or something along the lines of a federal scope of practice and interstate licensure. All things that have been discussed in some capacity, but are not really a reality right now, at least on a broad scale. We may get pieces of PBM reform, but ECAPs really is the biggest thing that's going to move the profession forward.
So let's recap what ECAPS is. That's an acronym. We've got legislation at the federal level, and it's really focused on provider authority for pharmacists for Medicare patients, right?
Correct. So this is really provider status for pharmacists on the federal level, specifically with Medicare. And that would pertain to Medicare Part B, so traditional Medicare coverage in the outpatient setting. It would also be Medicare Advantage coverage under Advantage plans. But this is specifically payment status, not scope of practice. So this is not going to expand pharmacist authorities any more than the state has already granted, or in some cases, the federal government has already granted. This is just recognizing us to be paid for services that we can already provide.
Got it. So you've got a customer that comes in, they've got Medicare as their medical insurance, and this allows the pharmacist to spend time delivering services to that customer, that patient, and then bill Medicare for that time, just kind of like a doctor would if the patient went to urgent care, right?
Exactly. This gives us the ability to provide some of those non-dispensing clinical services pharmacists have started to implement in community pharmacies. Right now, we can often treat a lot of the patients in line, but if the patient who comes up to the counter is a patient insured with Medicare right now, there's no way we can provide that service to them under their medical insurance.
Yeah, so I mean that's a crazy thing to me. So you sort of mentioned it there, but you can have a situation where today the pharmacist is responsible for really understanding what insurance the customer has, to understanding how they can provide this care to the customer. It's not even about what's allowed in their state, it's about just which medical insurance coverage the patient has, right? So it's like it seems unfair for some customers, but also that's got to be a pain for the pharmacist.
It really is frustrating where there's a lot of states where pharmacists have great scope, very broad scope that's similar to other provider types, where they could take any patient need that's appropriate for the practice setting and provide treatment. They can assess it, they can prescribe, they can refer to other providers, and they can get reimbursed for it. And in many states, often paired where you have that scope, you also have provider status under Medicaid or commercial plans, whether it's elective or it's forced by law. But in many states, we can provide treatment for a broad array of services, treat most patients who come in, but there's still not a single state where I can deliver a service or offer a service and know that anyone coming up can have coverage. I still have to, before I deliver that, screen, hey, what insurance do you have? And right now across the board, if it's Medicare, I have to say, are you willing to pay out of pocket? Or would it make more sense for you to go to the urgent care or schedule an appointment with your provider?
Yeah, so this is really not around a recognition or sort of blazing a new trail of how a pharmacist can interact in their community. It's just around categorization for the different insurance companies. And it seems that this has kind of really been pushed forward, and there's a lot of kind of recognition that pharmacists are very important in delivering services that happened through COVID. I know for myself and my family, we'd never gotten any sort of clinical services at a pharmacy until COVID happened, and then it's where we went to get our vaccines. And I think we as customers realized how much easier that was than having to make an appointment to go in to see the doctor, and you're dealing with their schedule, and your work schedule and that sort of thing. And so I think every one of our COVID vaccines that we got as a family, we went after work together. We didn't have to take time off, and we didn't have to take our daughter out of school like we might normally have to for her annual exams. And so pharmacists have played a huge role in vaccinations already, right?
Oh yeah, and I love your story. I think the reality for a lot of Americans too is, to a degree, they have not had the experience of going to the pharmacy for healthcare services, maybe vaccines, and that's something where it's also in our mind, we don't separate that out as a clinical service. A lot of times it's like, oh, I'm trying to get a drug product, so I'm going to the pharmacy. But COVID really shifted a lot of, I think, the mindset with the population, where they realized, oh, this would be fantastic. I mean, they got exposure to being able to go to any pharmacy. Not saying every pharmacy was offering this, but there was a federal scope of practice with the PrEP Act that allowed any pharmacist to assess a patient, order COVID tests if patient had COVID, prescribe COVID countermeasures. So that's antivirals, that could be antibodies that were directly injected at certain points in the pandemic. But that allowed patients to go to the pharmacy not just to receive a product, but to receive healthcare. And they also saw that when this is healthcare that is directly related to a prescribed product that they then need to get dispensed or administered, they can have it all done in one location in a very convenient fashion with someone who they're typically already established with, who has a background of what other medications they take, what their other medical conditions are, and is fairly accessible. Whereas personal experience, when I'm trying to get into my PCP, and if they hear this by any chance, this is not a dig at them. I love them. They do a fantastic job. But they don't typically staff to have wide availability for same-day appointments anymore. And that's really where this kind of critical issue of access is, and where pharmacists can really fill that need.
Yeah, so I mean, we all know about the provider shortages happening in the U.S. right now, and vaccines are a big category there, where we've been able to move some of that delivery away from traditional doctors into the pharmacy space, and the doctors can focus on the more acute things. I think one of the things we're talking about here is the three big categories of how people have medical insurance, right? There's the commercial insurance, Medicaid, and Medicare, and this just really opens up a new category across the country of folks that have that coverage that can now get access to these services. And so this isn't about an extension for Medicare into these different kinds of services that really fit well with, I think, the retail model or the community model. You've got a pharmacy that's close to home. And just to recap, what this actually looks like is we've got a patient that's not feeling well. Maybe they've got a sore throat or the sniffles or whatever. They can go into the pharmacy and get a point of care test. Same kind of test that would be used at the doctor's office or urgent care. Just a few minutes, that test comes back with a result, and that could be COVID or flu or strep or RSV. And if that's positive, this then allows the pharmacy to write a prescription maybe for Tamiflu and then fill it right there and take care of treating that patient. Do I kind of have that right in terms of the types of things that are covered under ECAPs, I think, but anything I'm missing there, or how do you think that evolves over time if this passes?
Yeah, all good questions. And I would say you've got the big picture correct. What I will say, there are limitations to ECAPs. It is just a very narrow window or range of services that would be covered under Medicare if this passes, or when this passes. It's going to be really respiratory test to treat services. So this would be covering the evaluation and management services of the pharmacist, so the visit, testing, so any tests ordered by the pharmacist, and then any prescriptions that may be ordered or treatments ordered for a select range of respiratory conditions. That's influenza, that's COVID-19, strep throat, and RSV. It also has authority for the federal government to declare emergencies that also would then allow pharmacists to provide services for them. Again, this is just payment. So this is allowing Medicare to pay for those services. The states, or something similar to the PrEP Act, would have to be engaged to ensure that pharmacists have the authority to deliver those services. And right now, I think it's about 38 states have some ability to provide test or treat services for one or more of those conditions. I think, like you're saying, the downstream effects we would be expecting are, one, I think states are all going to start doing an internal assessment of, can our pharmacists provide these services, and how do we get them to being able to, if Medicare is saying, yes, we're going to cover these? I also think we'll see other payers, the other two big classes you talked about, the commercial payers and then Medicaid. If they do not already cover pharmacist services, they typically tend to follow Medicare. So when Medicare recognizes someone as a provider, that's when you see broad coverage under commercial plans, and you see Medicaid agencies updating their state plans to allow coverage.
Yeah. So folks covered by Medicare in a state that doesn't currently have provider status would look at the next door state after ECAPs passes and say, I can go over and get this treatment from a pharmacy in that state, but not in my state. And so, 38 is, definitely the majority there. And we'd hope that that pushes across to Medicare coverage in every state with provider status. And then, of course, that flows down to the commercial and the Medicaid covered patients. It seems like what I'm hearing in the market, Zach, is there's an optimistic chance that this thing is going to pass relatively soon. I was talking to some friends of mine that do some work in government affairs, and they're predicting that there's maybe more than a 50% chance that this legislation happens in the next few months. And one of the exciting things for me is this isn't the first time it's been around, but I think it's been refined over the course of the last couple Congresses. It's got really strong bipartisan support in the House, which is kind of a rare thing to see, but pretty exciting. And fairly recently, a companion bill, the ECAPs Act, was introduced in the Senate, also with bipartisan support. So, I'm excited that this is actually going to happen. And I think a lot of the things that we talked about here support that it's the right thing to do for care delivery and access. And, everyone talks about how much more convenient and close retail pharmacy is than maybe access to a traditional health system. So I love the idea of people being able to get this kind of care at the pharmacy. You did talk a little bit for a second about how this is a medical billing thing. This is a little bit different than how a pharmacy would traditionally bill for dispensing medication, in that the pharmacy would have to consider the encounter, right? And so they're billing kind of for the time to the medical insurance rather than for the dispense to the prescription insurance. We could spend a whole podcast talking about how that works, but just high level, there is a different way that pharmacies have to think about this once the act passes in order to be able to kind of access the opportunity, right?
Absolutely. And this is also what I'm hearing in the market is a lot of work behind the scenes to be prepared for that when this eventually happens. And like you said, I've also heard there's I would say the best chance we've had with any iteration of an ECAPs or ECAPs-like bill of passing the finish line. And that means we now in pharmacies have to figure out medical billing. And that's different from pharmacy billing in the sense that some of the other clinical services we've been able to deliver and are routinely covered. I'm talking vaccines. I'm talking, in some cases, medication administration for long-acting injectables and other drugs that otherwise need to be administered to a patient and billed in some capacity. They often have the ability, because it is a drug product, there's a way to bill it under the pharmacy benefit with the same software that pharmacies already use for dispensing medications. Really, there is not any great system right now to bill for a clinical service in a pharmacy software, and it's not billed to the same benefit. It's not billed to, basically from a patient's perspective, they typically have a separate card or a separate piece of information on their card that has the medical benefits, and we have to construct a medical claim completely differently and route it to a different payer in a different format. And right now, that means pharmacies have to figure out new processes, new systems, new registration just to collect the right information. So this is a whole, as you mentioned, it can be a whole topic on its own. It is confusing, but there definitely are solutions that pharmacies can engage with to prepare ahead of time and be ready to implement ECAPs, as soon as the regulations get finalized.
Well, and that's what we're passionate about. Workflow services and is enabling that medical billing and clinical service delivery. But to point out one thing, the thing about ECAPs is there's this huge wave of newly eligible patients that can get access to these kinds of services. In many states, pharmacists can already do this and bill commercial or Medicaid, and they have to do that medical billing already, right? And so, Zach, it seems to me it's not a question of, well, I'm just going to wait to see what happens with ECAPs. There might be really great opportunity there today for pharmacies to start expanding their services and diversifying their revenue. But with ECAPs coming along, it's just like one of the biggest waves that we can imagine that would, wash up and on the shore of the pharmacies and really enable them to take a huge different step change into how they can deliver services. So that's pretty exciting. Zach, you were sharing a story with me before we started recording about how this isn't necessarily the first time that pharmacists have been considered providers, but there's a sort of a long legacy in the evolution of the role pharmacy played. I'm curious, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I really love this story, and oftentimes even some pharmacists don't know our own history, but pharmacy as a profession has a really storied history. And I'm talking about going all the way back to the apothecary days, really the process of assessing a patient, or the practice of assessing, recommending or prescribing, and then providing treatments, specifically medications for patients, was not separated from the profession of pharmacy, at least not in totality. There certainly were physicians, and they had a skill set different from apothecaries and pharmacists, but oftentimes the pharmacy and the pharmacist were the first person you went to receive assessment and treatment for your conditions. And that was in the era when really the pharmacy was preparing the product itself, as in gathering the natural products, the herbals, and actually concocting the medication itself. As patent drugs kind of came into being, as the professions evolved more to what modern expectations and roles are, regulations and licensure came in. The Prescription Drug Act came in that gave prescription status to medications and relegated that to only being able to be provided on the dispensation of a physician. The professions really bifurcated more clearly. But pharmacies had multiple evolutions in our history where we had to reinvent ourselves based on some stressor. And the development of patent drugs was one of them. Different professional standards where pharmacists couldn't even counsel for a period of time. That was considered unprofessional conduct. And now we're moving back. Again, I think the stressors now are really payment from PBMs and dispensing as a whole not being a viable model anymore. And to continue to have access to pharmaceuticals through a community pharmacy has been going back to its roots and recognizing that, no, we are a critical healthcare provider. We are a key access hub for communities. And we can really bolster the healthcare system as a whole without separating or really segregating care and discoordinating care, but really taking some of that low acuity care or some of that urgent care in the community where patients are already going, maintaining access to other prescription services, and then helping maintain access and a proper referral over to physicians for higher acuity concerns.
Yeah. One of the things that you shared that came out of that evolution is the advent of the soda fountain. And as my friends all know, I'm a bit of an ice cream enthusiast. And so there's some of those that are still left around. And I always love visiting a pharmacy that's got a soda fountain in it. It's just such a cool place in the community. And some of them are doing some awesome things. Well, Zach, one of the things that you mentioned is all the different folks that are involved here. And one of the most exciting things for me about this kind of care delivery in pharmacy and the ECAPs bill is it really is a win-win-win all the way around. Obviously, the patients win if you can get access to this kind of care, more convenient, closer, faster, easier to your home. The pharmacies win; they can serve their communities better and diversify their revenue a little bit more in new and different ways. I think the providers win because they can focus on the higher acuity stuff and making sure that they're spending the time with the patients that have the biggest need. And I think, frankly, the insurance companies win too. If your members can get quicker access to care, you can avoid sort of longer term, higher acuity situations as maybe a sickness would progress. And so it's one of the things that I'm really excited about. Again, I think for me, it's important to keep in mind, this isn't a new way of thinking about what the pharmacy can do. It's just sort of a new recognition that more folks in the U.S. That have Medicare as their medical insurance company can access these kind of services in this convenient place that's already allowed to deliver them to other folks. So we're going to keep our eye on it. I think it's a dangerous thing to try and predict what happens with any federal legislation. So I'm going to avoid doing that to the extent that I can. But Any final thoughts from you, Zach, as we keep a watch on what's happening with these ECAPs bills at the federal level?
I think, Kevin, really what stood out is, and you kind of called this out, I think it's a really good takeaway point. The best thing you can do to be prepared for ECAPs now is to, if you're in one of those 38 states, start delivering these services. Connect with the right vendor, connect with Kevin, and get your pharmacy and your pharmacist already in the workflow. You can operate this model on a cash pay basis, or you can engage the patients that have payers that already recognize pharmacists. And that's the best way to be prepared for when the floodgates open, when Medicare does pass this bill, whether it's this year, whether it's next session. Best way to be prepared is to already be delivering that work and being
you
out
can be
there.
ready to go on day one, right? When ECAPs
Yep.
passes, you could be going on day one. Yeah, it's very cool. Well, Zach, it was great to see you. Great to connect again. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back on the next episode of ECAPs Watch.
Thanks for having me.